Happy 2026. Welcome back to the Biometric Update Podcast. I'm your host, Joel McConvey. Today's episode features a conversation with Andrew Hammond, Director of KJR, the Australian software quality engineering firm that led testing for the age assurance technology trial. I'll ask you to start by giving us an overview of what KJR does, and specifically what role it played in the Australian age assurance technology trial.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, so KJR as an entity is coming into our 28th year of operation. So we started in 1997 in the lead up to the Y2K bug. And so we provide software quality assurance engineering services around Australia and Southeast Asia. And our role in the age assurance technology trial was we ran all the verification activities and also managed the school-based activities as well too. So we had a team that looked at all of the software that was submitted, all of the documentation that was submitted, actively tested a lot of it, and then facilitated the testing with students in schools as well as our own children.
Mm-hmm. There's so much going on with age assurance right now. It's a little wild in the world with the regulations and the legislation coming in, but it all kind of started in Australia. And we're now sort of almost a month into the prohibition for social media for kids under 16. So in your estimation, how is that going so far?
Well, I think definitely from a new account creation point of view, that's definitely in and working. And we've done some testing, as have many people, around the creation of new accounts. And as soon as you say that you're under 16, that's a no deal. You're not allowed to create an account. But we have seen, and there's been definitely reports of it, that as soon as you say you are over 16, then there's not very many boundaries or limitations that are put in. And there has been a fair bit of coverage in the media from different folks around kids that have just essentially lied about their age and then not being challenged or and gotten through. So I think the implementation it's in the legislation is there, and you're not able to create a new account if you're under 16. But what impact that's had on the kids that were or are under 16 and have an account, it definitely seems to be lots of questions being raised about, well, I saw nothing changed, or I haven't been challenged to prove my age and stuff like that. So I think that just being a month in, there's still a fair bit of refinement to the technology stack to be done in terms of at what point does someone get challenged for their age. What we saw in the age assurance technology trial what was recommended was there's a buffer age. So my expectation, and I was not part of the implementation team or anything like that, but I thought it was probably the way it would be implemented. As soon as you said you were between 16 and 18 and a half or 19, then you'd be expected to either do a facial age estimation or use your hands or provide some level of documentation. But that doesn't seem to be the case so far as we can tell at the moment. That may change in the near future, though.
Do you yourself know any teens who've been affected by the law that have either found it easy to skirt or frustrating to navigate?
The teens that I know of have actually reported they haven't been impacted at all. But they have said that they're within their circle of friends. They've had friends that have been impacted, but then various ways of getting around the ban essentially. So some just said I was impacted one day and the next day it was fine, and then others are like, I haven't noticed any change at all. So it's been, I guess, a mixed bag in terms of the who's been impacted and then what level of impact has there been. But definitely the handful of teens that I know quite well have sort of they kind of, because we were involved in the trial, they sort of they associate the ban with the work that we were doing personally. They're like, oh, your ban's not working. It wasn't technically my ban. I was just trying to help out on that process. But it is interesting that there's I do think there is a bit of Aussie larrikinism there. We do love a joke and that sort of stuff. So I do think that bit of banter around what's happening. I genuinely don't think that is masking. I don't think it's a false sort of pretense, but it is people are, even though the ban might not have impacted them in terms of the things that they can access, everyone is talking about it, and there's a real conversation or conversations around the impact of the ban going forward. And that's also, I think, in one sense, it's like, well, it didn't end up being a doomsday event where everyone under 16 was locked out of all of these systems. It has definitely brought the conversation around social media and our interactions with social media and how that works and that age appropriateness. And so I think, it's interesting. That wasn't the effect that I had anticipated, but I think it will be the one that leads to generational change. And I did, while we were doing the trial activities, I do and was sort of confident that it was going to take a generation, and by that, not necessarily a full generation in the traditional sense, but like that 13 to 16-year-old bracket, once the 13-year-olds that are, could have got an account today can't, once they're 16. I actually think that will be what we'll see, is that kids will just be like, oh, well, yeah, social media, that's just the way it is. So, that definitely seems to be what's playing out. And we did actually see, when we were working with the kids in schools, the younger children, so sort of the 11, 12, 13, some of the 14-year-olds was at that point, they en masse, they were like, oh, social media, like, yeah, they weren't that interested in it. So yeah, as I say, I think what we'll see is a sort of a generational shift in our attitude towards accessing social media, and hopefully that's, I guess, is what the legislation was aiming to do.
Yeah, and I mean, generations, of course, change their ideas often adversely to the one before them, anyhow. So that'll be interesting to see that play out. I want to ask you about the trial. It was pretty clear in its declaration that privacy preserving age assurance can be done in Australia. Working on the testing side, do you are there any caveats to that you would add, or do you think it's a pretty accurate statement?
But definitely it's an accurate statement. The only caveat I would add to that is there was a range of technology from some technology providers that that provided their applications that were fairly immature. So they were startups with highly functioning prototypes, but prototypes nonetheless, all the way through to some of the big players that are doing millions of age estimation checks. So certainly the ones that were at the higher TRL level, without question, no caveats on them. They had security and privacy by design at the forefront. And it's not to say that the newer systems were less privacy preserving. It's just they weren't as mature. So there was sort of, you'd need to reassess them as their maturity increases to make sure that they've still stayed there. So, but in general, I think that we stand by that comment. And the sort of observation is that there was definitely privacy by design, because what we were trying to achieve in the technology trial, and what age estimation or age assurance is trying to do, is just work out how old are you, not who are you. So work out that I'm over 18, fairly obviously, but anything else in that piece, anything else about me when I'm trying to access some of those services, is not really relevant.
Mm-hmm. Where do you think we are in the curve of age assurance's evolution? How far along do you think this is towards sort of full maturity?
It's a great question, and I think, like a lot of sort of software development activities, and certainly the ones that we're involved in, and this is sort of a shift that I've noticed probably over the last 10 years, is that nothing is really ever finished anymore. And so what we used to find when we were testing applications and stuff like that, you'd get to the end and you'd do all the testing, you'd roll it out to production, and then you kind of sit back and relax for 3 to 6 months before you needed to do the next iteration of that upgrade. But these days, in the way we develop software around the world, is that we might put out the version 1 of the software, and then someone else that we're interconnected with through APIs or other integrations, they'll update they'll go to 1.1, and all of a sudden you're in this spot where your software is never complete. And so what I would say for the age assurance is that it's only going to get better and better over time. And I think in terms of when do we hit full maturity, I guess that would be, again, sort of, if you looked at the spectrum of solutions that are available, the ones that are at sort of at the top end of performance now, I'd say they're getting close to sort of a mature system, or sort of a mature stable system. So what you'll see is their effectiveness will increase marginally over time, whereas those that are at the sort of the lower end of the maturity, they'll make some big jumps as they catch up. So I think where we are relative to where we could be, I think there's still definitely a lot of sort of efficiency and effectiveness that we can improve on. But in terms of where is the ultimate goal, I think it'll just keep going and going and going. And I think the other piece too, what we saw was sort of good representation of the software providers, but obviously a lot of the providers that we were working with were Europe-based and US-based, and there was a good contingent from Australia. But there's a lot of other jurisdictions around the world that didn't have their software in there. So it's sort of, we weren't testing from a global populace point of view. So it is possible that there's some other sort of geographies that their age assurance in there is not quite as, or may not be as well formed or well functioning as what it is in sort of our Western society. So I think that, depending on where we set the goal is it good enough and is it working? It'll impact on where, how far through that journey we are.
Having seen a wide variety of options that are available, at least like you said, from the kind of Western world, so to speak, do you think there's room for growth in terms of methods, or do you think the kind of core technology is setting at this point? And how much more is this going to evolve and change beyond the kind of basics that we have right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think most certainly, I think there is definitely space for other sort of other methods, and I guess some of them are ones that we don't even haven't even thought of right at the moment. But if you think about the way that we're doing it, most of the providers at the moment do facial age estimation because that's it's easy. Everyone's got a face. Pretty much everyone's got a face. So that's nice and easy. There's the guys from from France, Niederman, that use the hand gestures. So I can see sort of a world, and I guess sort of spaces in that sort of ecosystem where it could be down to the your iris scans or the way that you voice and stuff like that. I think there was one of the solutions in there. I won't say the name because in case I get it wrong, but who were able to use voice, and theirs was actually the inverse. They were checking for younger voices opposed to older to control chat rooms and stuff like that in a gaming environment and stuff. So I think voice is an area that is evolving quite rapidly. Say gestures, and I think I do think there's room. If we look at the trial, we had mostly facial age estimation was sort of the largest cohort. So I can see when the ecosystem sort of rounds out, so there's almost equal options between each of those sorts of different biometrics or solutions, and I think that's how we'll get there. And I mean, you've got fingerprints and handprints and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, I definitely think there's certainly space for new and expanded types of testing to come through, solutions to come through into that space.
It's interesting. One of the criticisms that often gets thrown at these technologies is bias. But the way you speak about the fact that some of these technologies just haven't been developed in their kind of local context yet, and so as that happens, as more and more different places develop this technology, presumably that will diversify the tech itself too, rather than just the data sets or whatnot. Speaking of data sets, I want to talk about AI because KJR does much more than just age check testing. Can you tell me a bit about the firm's work in AI adoption and some of the other projects that you're excited about right now?
Yeah, definitely. We've got lots of things that we're working on, and I often say it's like we got into the AI space before it was cool. We wrote our first white paper for one of the Australian federal government agencies in 2017 about how they could use AI and machine learning to improve some of their processes and stuff like that. So we've been in this space for a while. Probably one of the ones that is a pet project of mine, so a little bit biased on it as well, is we do some work with heavy vehicle truck drivers, and so it's a predominantly male-based vocation, and our truck drivers are, and this is around the world too. It's the same problem, is they're getting older, and there's not enough of them. So we developed a prototype that uses AI to monitor and evaluate a person's heart rate. And heart rate variability to then predict how fatigued they are, and then how fatigued they're going to be in an hour or two, so we can get them off the road so that we can minimise accidents. So that's one of the ones that's it was quite exciting. We're also doing some work with a company that, and I won't say names, just to not sort of promoting them necessarily, but they do the management and of the AI models that run on CCTV cameras. So most modern cameras that you'll see in place can run AI at the edge. So whether they're doing facial recognition or people counting or some other sort of application, and so we're working with them around how do we check that the AI model that's deployed to the camera is actually doing what it's meant to be doing, and how is that where was the data sets that it was trained on? Is it performing and stuff like that? And is it authorized too? Because and it's the same with a lot of tech, not just CCTV cameras, is that there's often things that are just on by default, and unless you go in and turn them off, you're not really sure what data is being collected, where's it being sent, because just about everything these days is internet connected as well. So that's a pretty cool one. And then we've got some other activities happening in FedGov. FedGov is starting to increase the pace of AI adoption. So it's sort of, and I think this is reflective of the global status. So we're going from that, okay, let's just play with some AI and see what it does and do some chatting and stuff like that, to actually how are we going to use it to improve efficiency or enable us to do more with less. Because I think this is a fairly universal statement, is that there's not many people you speak to that their organisation, regardless of whether it's private or public, have enough people to do everything they need to do. So what we need to do collectively is work out, well, how do we do all the things we need to get done with the workforce we have, and how do we have that sort of, in defence terms, the force multiplier effect, where one person is actually able to do the work of one or many. So some really interesting activities going on there. I think the final one that, again, that's another one I'm heavily involved in. We are often flying drones around late at night counting feral animals. So we help manage the biodiversity of a few areas where we're counting feral animals and using AI to detect, is it a kangaroo, a rabbit, a deer, and what type of animal it is. And then we're able to provide sort of that objective quality evidence, similar to what we did for AATT, to say to the landholder, here's what we saw, here's the video footage of what we saw. You may want to do something about those animals, or they may be at the point where they're controlled. So there's still definitely a fair few fun activities that we've got going on that all come back to that central theme that we've been working on all the time, about trust and implementing software in a safe and secure manner.
The animal project sounds really cool. Very neat. Trust is really the crux of the issue when it comes to any of this stuff, when it comes to digital identity, when it comes to biometrics and sharing that data, and when it comes to testing. Do you think there's a sort of magic bullet for getting people to trust software the way they trust inherently, like a bank or a plane? There still seems to be this distrust of digital activity, digital transactions, that eventually disappears with industries that are regulated, but it takes time.
Yeah.
How do we get there with this stuff?
Yeah. Well, I think you sort of took the words out of what I was going to say. In those heavily regulated industries where there's large risk to either personal safety or financial safety, is that's where we start to see regulations. And I think that definitely where software's been around for quite a few years now. It's not new, but it doesn't seem to have had that same sort of, even though it is like, and this software is ubiquitous around the world, same as banks and aeroplanes as the two examples there, which is, but we haven't seen that same sort of regulation come in, and I don't know if that's because the barrier to entry to create software and to put a service out is quite low now, and depending on which service you use and how much AI and how much vibe coding and all that sort of stuff, like put a new service out to the world in minutes now, essentially. So I think that how do we get there is it's a very interesting question, and potentially it's the question of, well, do we ever get there? Like, I think that the larger corporations, and so I'm an Apple user. That's my whole house. So Apple seems to have, in terms of the way they've approached that building of trust and building of brand reputation based on that, it is probably an interesting case study. I'm not suggesting that every organisation needs to be like Apple, but I do think there's that sort of interesting point where it's how do we trust? And if I just think about sort of where the things that are to be read in software and the services that I use, we use some startups because they're challenging the status quo and stuff like that. So I think that there's an element of understanding of what the service is you're consuming, and I think it's also, we're talking earlier about generational. I know in the lead up to the trial, it was one of our staff's daughters is just like, I don't care what all my information is out on the internet. It's all on social media. They've got photos of me doing this and that, and she's like she didn't care about that personal level of trust in that sense, because she's like, well, it's already out there. Whereas the older generations that are like where I am, it's we grew up when you had to have you go into the bank with a book and they write down your transaction and come out. So we've learnt trust through that mechanism, and I do wonder how it's how sort of the younger generations coming through that are sort of grown up as digital natives, whether they have that same level of issue with trust that we do. So I think it's a great question. I don't necessarily have a concise answer, but it's one I think that's hopefully we don't want to have crises to sort of to bring that into either regulation or to question our trust. But I do sort of think that the part of the way we've evolved, it would seem, in my opinion, is that we've had these crises, and essentially and I'm not an airplane expert by any stretch, but there's lots of them that didn't work until we got to the point where they do work quite routinely now, and issues are the minority, the same as the banks and stuff like that. So I think I suspect unfortunately there's probably going to be some level of crisis that will happen at some point. And at that point, we'll have to then collectively go, okay, well, we can't have that happen again. Therefore, here's the trust framework that's going to, or regulation framework that's going to need to be put in place.
One of the most insightful things I've heard people in the industry say is, the top guys, we want to be regulated. We are asking to be regulated because that's how we're going to build that trust. And that's a fascinating contrast to people who, the innovation side is really the priority, and the regulation is framed as a restriction. And I think, there's two sides of the coin there. It's fascinating to think about how they work together. And they kind of, and certainly I know in Australia, and I'm sure it's similar elsewhere, where there's one in terms of AI adoption. There's a sort of half of the market wants the regulation and guardrails and mandatory guardrails, and the other half is completely the other opposite. Don't regulate anything because you'll stifle innovation, and just let the market kind of work it out. And I think it's sort of interesting to see we saw, I should say, it wasn't personally, but there's lobbying of the Australian government for a set of outcomes, and then the outcomes came out, and then almost the same people who were lobbying for it were then criticising because it wasn't good enough in terms of the AI guardrails and regulation. So it's sort of it's fascinating to see how that sort of plays out, or how that interplay goes. Last question for you here, and we've touched on the sort of generational aspect, time, how these things change the more people just get accustomed to them. So given that, And given how much things are changing right now, where do you see Australia in 3 years, say, in terms of regulation, age assurance, or the world, frankly, because it all seems to be going in the same direction?
Yeah, definitely. The way I've described it, and I wasn't involved in the policy by any stretch of the imagination. So, but what it appears to be have happened is it's like if we were the stone that got thrown into the water, and the ripples are starting to come out. And so, what my expectation would be that in sort of that 3-year time frame, that most of the, I'd say most of the globe will have age assurance, because I think that the way, in the context of social media, I should say, because I think that the way that the Australian government has approached it by putting that regulation on the biggest providers of these systems, and they're all global, so it would, to me, make sense that other government entities then sort of get involved or look at that and go, well, if Australians are doing it, and parts of the US are doing it and parts of Europe are doing it, then we can just say, yeah, we want in too, so just turn that on. So I'd say I'm less sure, because I haven't had as much exposure about what happens in the non-Western world. I think that it would surprise me if they weren't sort of making strides towards it. And I think that the other thing I would say in 3 years' time would be that I guess that you would expect the list of in-scope applications or solutions would have increased, because I think that social media providers will evolve and adapt, and new ones will pop up. So I think that will have that. And I think in Australia too, the other piece of context, I guess, is we've got the stage 2 codes that have come out for media. So outside of age assurance for social media, in terms of using our search engines now, if you want access to sort of adult content, regardless of what that is, you need to have an account with that provider and have proof that you're over 18 to then get that information back. So I think it's, from that perspective, I think age assurance is probably going to be more sort of more common than it is now. I think the other piece is certainly in Australia where we're moving towards digital licenses as well. So I think that our and not to say that we'll need to use a license to prove how old we are, but I think most of the population, once we sort of get to that saturation point of digital licenses and effectively it's a form of digital ID, we'll see that as a more commonplace method of proving how old we are. So I think it's, definitely, I don't think it's going to be ubiquitous around the world, but I do think it's going to be those places or jurisdictions that don't have some of these measures will be the exception rather than the norm.
I hear it all the time. The Australians are doing it, so we have to as well. That's that's how it goes.
It's exactly right. So, that's it. And so I think it's and I mean it was a bold move, and in terms of context too, we were in the process of getting ready for the trial before the social media ban was announced, and we were. Certainly, most people weren't aware that it was coming. Certainly not us, and ours was part of the E-Safety Commissioner's roadmap to online safety. So, in terms of the trial process, so I think it came together, quite fortuitously, I suppose, for that sort of social movement. So, it's definitely watch the space, and I think, so I'm biased being an Aussie, but a lot of we punch above our weight from our little population when it comes to delivering, technology that gets delivered, and impacts around the world. You look at Wi-Fi as an example. It's like, just about every device on the planet now has Wi-Fi, and that all started down here in little Australia. So, not to say that our technology will be ubiquitous around the world, but I do think we don't shy away from doing things that might turn out to be, adopted around the world. So,
trailblazers, which is awesome. Well, thank you so much, Andrew. It's been really, really great to talk. Awesome to get your perspective on this stuff, and I really appreciate you taking the time and navigating the time difference. So, I will say good day at this point, but it's been great to chat, and thanks again.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks again to Andrew Hammond of KJR. Check out their website at kjr.com.au. And thanks to you for listening. Until next time, be sure to visit www.biometricupdate.com for all the latest news on biometrics and digital ID.